It's one of the oldest, most repeated pieces of backyard pest advice passed down through generations. Found an ant mound in your lawn? Just grab the hose, run it directly into the entrance, and flood them out. No chemicals, no cost, just water, and it feels almost intuitively correct. Ants are small. Water is powerful. Surely a determined enough flood should overwhelm and destroy an underground colony. Except if you've ever actually tried this yourself, you already know how the story usually ends. You flood the mound thoroughly, sometimes for several minutes straight, watching water disappear into the entrance with what feels like real destructive force behind it. And within a day, sometimes within hours, the mound is back, often rebuilt slightly larger than before, with ants moving in and out as though nothing happened at all. The reason this method fails so consistently isn't bad luck or insufficient water pressure. It's because ant colonies have spent millions of years evolving specific architectural and behavioral solutions to exactly this threat, flooding, since underground nests have always faced the risk of rain and groundwater intrusion long before a single homeowner ever picked up a garden hose. Today, we're going to explain exactly what happens underground the moment water hits that entrance, and why the colony you're trying to flood out is, in a very real sense, built specifically to survive it. Before ever considering a homeowner with a hose, every ant colony that survives long-term in an outdoor environment has already had to solve a considerably more frequent and more challenging problem: ordinary rainfall, which any established colony must survive repeatedly across every season it exists, sometimes facing genuinely heavy downpours many times a year. Researchers who have conducted detailed excavations of ant nests, using techniques like pouring plaster or molten metal into abandoned colonies to create a permanent cast of the tunnel structure before careful excavation, have documented that many species construct their nest architecture with water management specifically factored into the design. This includes chambers positioned at varying depths, allowing the colony to relocate brood and workers upward or downward depending on moisture conditions, along with tunnel systems often angled and structured in ways that promote drainage away from the deepest, most critical chambers rather than allowing water to pool and accumulate there. Many species also construct their surface mounds with a specific shape and internal structure that actively sheds water rather than channeling it directly downward into the nest. The classic dome or crater shape visible on many ant mounds isn't simply a byproduct of excavated soil being piled up incidentally. In several well-studied species, this shape's a genuine functional purpose, encouraging rainfall to run off the sides of the mound rather than directly over the entrance, while the internal tunnel structure just beneath the surface often includes specific chambers and passage angles designed to intercept and redirect any water that does enter, well before it reaches the deeper chambers housing the queen and the bulk of the colony's population. This is the central reason the entire flooding approach tends to underperform so consistently. From the colony's perspective, a garden hose directed at a single entrance is, in terms of the biological and behavioral response it triggers, remarkably similar to an intense localized rainstorm, a scenario the colony's structure and behavior are already specifically adapted to survive. The moment water begins entering a nest entrance in meaningful quantity, worker ants resorting to well-established emergency behaviors over the colony's evolutionary history, behaviors researchers have specifically documented in response to both natural flooding events and experimental water application during colony studies. These responses typically include rapid relocation of the most vulnerable members of the colony, eggs, larvae, and pupae, up and away from the water source, toward higher or distant chambers within the same nest structure, echoing the same relocation behaviors discussed in earlier videos on this channel covering brood care and disturbance response generally. Simultaneously, many species engage active water-blocking behavior at a more immediate tactical level, with workers using excavated soil particles to rapidly temporary barriers or divert incoming water within the tunnel stem itself, functionally similar to sandbagging a doorway during a flood, redirecting the water along specific tunnel paths engineered to lead it away from the colony's core rather than allowing it to simply pool and saturate the entire structure uniformly. This combination, structural design that discourages pooling in the first place, combined with rapid, coordinated emergency behavior the moment water is detected, means that even a genuinely significant volume of water poured directly into a mound entrance is, from the colony's perspective, a manageable, survivable event, rather than the catastrophic, decisive strike it appears to be from the surface. To fully appreciate just how capable ants are of surviving water-based threats, it's worth looking at the most extreme documented example of this resilience, one that goes considerably further than simple internal drainage and relocation behavior, and helps explain why even a determined homeowner with a hosing against biological adaptations refined for far more serious threats than a garden hose could ever represent. Fire ants, among the most extensively studied species in terms of flood response, are capable of a genuinely remarkable collective behavior when faced with actual, significant flooding, such as during heavy storms or rising groundwater, rather than simply attempting to survive structure. Potentially including tens of thousands of individuals along with the queen and developing brood, will link together using their legs and mandibles, forming a living raft on the surface of the water, with workers on the outer layer sacrificing some of their own body's airtime capability to keep the structure buoyant, while brood and the queen are positioned safely toward the center and top of the raft, protected from direct water contact. This living raft, documented extensively by researchers studying fire ant colonies in flood-prone regions, can remain intact and floating for extended periods, in some observed cases for weeks if necessary, until the raft eventually makes contact with dry land, elevated vegetation, or any other stable surface, at which point the colony reforms into a normal nest structure at the new location. While this specific extreme behavior, primarily in fire ants and a small number of related species rather than being universal across all ant species, it illustrates just how far ant colonies as a broader group have evolved specific, sophisticated responses to flooding threats considerably greater than anything a residential garden hose could realistically replicate, underscoring why the flooding method so often fails to achieve anything close to the decisive result homeowners expect. This is the detail that genuinely surprises most people who've tried this method and noticed the mound seemingly return larger than before. And it follows directly from the emergency response behaviors covered above, rather than representing any kind of coincidence. When a colony experiences water intrusion at a specific entrance, the subsequent excavation and repair work involved in clearing waterlogged soil, reinforcing damaged tunnel sections, and re-establishing normal drainage and structurality around that entrance frequently results in a measurable amount of excavated soil being brought to the surface over the following day or two, soil that gets deposited around the mound's exterior in the same way ordinary nest maintenance and expansion activity normally would. Because this repair-related excavation activity is concentrated into a short period immediately following the disturbance, rather than spread gradually across weeks the way routine growth typically occurs, the resulting mound can appear noticeably larger in a surprisingly window, creating the specific, counterintuitive outcome many homeowners report. Watering a mound seemingly resulted in a bigger mound within a day, rather than the smaller or eliminated mound they were expecting. There's an additional contributing factor worth mentioning as well. In some cases, flooding a single entrance prompts the colony to increase excavation activity at nearby secondary entrances, echoing the same distributed, multi-entrance resilience discussed in the previous video on cement sealing failures, further contributing to a visible increase in surface soils disturbance across a wider area surrounding the original target, rather than the clean, singular reduction in visible colony activity a homeowner pouring water into one specific hole was hoping to achieve. Beyond the colony's active defensive responses, there's a simpler, more basic physical reason a hose-based flooding attempt frequently fails to affect the colony's core population at all. The actual depth and extent of a colony's tunnel system considerably exceeds what most people assume from surface observation, and considerably exceeds what a typical garden hose is capable of genuinely saturating throughout. While mound height and visible surface disturbance considerably by species and colony age, excavated colonies of many common ant species have been documented extending several feet below the surface, with the queen and the most critical brood-rearing chambers typically situated at the deepest, most protected point within that structure, specifically because greater depth offers more stable temperature, moisture, and protection from surface disturbances, precisely the kind of disturbance a hose represents. Water poured into a surface entrance, even continuously for several minutes, faces combined resistance of soil absorption along the tunnel walls, the colony's active drainage and diversion behavior covered earlier, and simple gravity and working against it, reaching the deepest chambers in meaningful volume before dispersing into the surrounding soil structure, long before could threaten the queen or the bulk of the colony's population directly. In practical terms, this means the water during a typical flooding attempt is very likely affecting primarily the upper, more accessible sections of the tunnel network. Sections the colony can relatively easily repair and re-excavate using the emergency response behaviors already discussed, while leaving the deepest, most critical population and the queen herself essentially unaffected by the entire process. To be fair and accurate rather than dismissing the entire concept outright, it's worth noting the specific circumstances under which water application can have some genuine, if generally limited, impact, since the picture isn't entirely one-sided. Repeated, sustained flooding applied consistently over an extended period, considerably beyond a single hose treatment, particularly in combination with naturally saturated soil conditions during an unusually wet season, can genuinely stress a colony, sometimes prompting a full relocation to a new site if the original location becomes persistently unsuitable due to ongoing waterlogging. This is a fundamentally different scenario from a single, decisive flooding attempt, however, representing more of a gradual habitat degradation approach than the immediate flood them out result most homeowners are hoping to achieve with a single hose treatment. Additionally, very young, newly established colonies, founded by a single queen who has not yet had the opportunity to construct the full, resilient tunnel architecture and hasn't yet built up the worker population necessary for effective emergency response behaviors, are genuinely more vulnerable to flooding than mature, established colonies. This means a homeowner who identifies in floods a very early-stage colony, often visible only as a small, unremarkable patch of disturbed soil rather than an obvious mound, may see more genuine effect than the same method applied to an established mound that's been developing for months or years and has had ample time to build the redundancy and resilience covered throughout this video. Given the limitations covered above, here's a more realistic, effective approach for homeowners genuinely needing to address an ant colony rather than simply reaching for whatever tool happens to be closest at hand. Consider whether intervention is genuinely necessary first, since as covered in earlier videos on this channel, many yard-based ant colonies provide real ecological benefit through soil aeration and pest predation, and a mound in a low-traffic area of your lawn may not require any action at all. If intervention is warranted, use bait-based treatments rather than physical or water-based methods. As covered in the previous video on cement sealing, bait treatments work specifically because foraging workers carry the substance back to the colony and distribute it through normal food-sharing behavior, reaching the queen and the deepest population far more reliably than any external application, whether water, cement, or most surface-applied substances, can achieve on its own. For colonies specifically causing structural concern near a fashion, driveway, or walkway, consult a pest control professional who can assess the full extent of the tunnel network and apply treatment methods designed to address the entire colony structure rather than a single visible entry point. If you do want to address a very young, recently established colony while it's still genuinely vulnerable, identifying it early, before it develops into a large, established mound with full architectural resilience, represents the one scenario covered in this video where more basic intervention methods have a meaningfully better chance of producing the result you're hoping for. The mound sitting in your lawn represents the visible surface expression of a structure specifically engineered over millions of years of evolutionary refinement to survive exactly the homeowner's garden hose represents. Sudden, localized water intrusion, a threat every successful ant colony has already had to solve repeatedly through nothing more than the ordinary rainstorms that occur every single season across nearly every environment ants inhabit. Understanding this doesn't mean ant colony in your yard is invincible, is never appropriate, but it does mean that a single satisfying blast from a garden hose is working against millions of years of specifically of architectural and behavioral resilience, a mismatch that explains, far bad luck ever could, why so many homeowners find themselves staring at a rebuilt, sometimes larger mound within a day or two of what felt, in the moment, like a decisive and thorough flooding. Have you ever tried flooding an ant hill with a hose, only to find the mound back within a day or two? Tell me about it in the comments below. I read every single one, and sometimes your stories become the subject of the next video. And if you've ever wondered what another small creature quietly living in your yard actually knows about your world, I think the next video might surprise you just as much as this one did. Until then, keep watching, keep wondering, and never stop paying attention to the small things.